All right. So we can get the defrost fan out and get it set up for the next batch. So it's all defrosted after the batch with the hamburger and the rice dishes. Now I'm going to get it set up for the next thing, and I'm not sure I should even call this a batch because it's going to be more like a science experiment. Somebody had asked after we did the minute rice, how much water is in regular rice, dry rice before it's cooked. So we're going to do a tray. I'm going to try to put 1,000 grams on that tray of dry rice. And on the other trays, we'll put other dry things that I've been interested in. We're going to do dry pinto beans, so before they're cooked. And I think those will take the longest because they're bigger pieces and they're not really meant to let the water out. So that'll be interesting. And then also going to do a tray of sugar and a tray of salt to find out how much moisture it absorbs out of the air. So yeah, more of a science experiment than a freeze dryer batch, but we'll find out how it comes out and see how it goes. I think it'll be interesting to find how much water's in those. So we'll get it set up, and it probably doesn't really need to be pre-cooled. These aren't going to be frozen items, they're just room temperature items, and there's almost no water in them, so it probably doesn't matter. But it's the normal way I do it, so I'm going to go ahead and continue with that same method. So I already have a ring all the way around, so that's good. I don't have to worry about air going through the seal and leaving a frozen spot on it. So we'll get it started, and I'm just going to start with customize and start custom and continue. So now we'll go get the food on the trays. It really doesn't need to cool very long, so we'll get the food on the trays and get them in here. We can tell we're doing science and not just screwing around because I'm taking notes. So I'm not going to use any parchment papers or anything on these, just going to put stuff directly on the trays. And for salt, the only salt that we had where we had enough salt was we had some canning and pickling salt, and so it's just pure salt, so that's fine. I think if I was going to store it away for long term, I might use some iodine salt, so I would have the iodine in it. But we'll go to 1750, so we'll add 1,000 grams of salt to the tray. So 1,000 grams of salt, tray 1. And tray 2, rice. So our container with rice, need to take that to 1743. 1743, so 1,000 grams of the rice. Tray 3, we've got sugar, just regular table sugar. And we need 1737. 1737, so 1,000 grams of sugar. And then finally, going to use some red kidney beans. Okay, 1,000 grams of the kidney beans. Still, I'm going to try to put thermometers in these. So we have our tray of salt, rice, sugar, and beans. Now the rice and beans are basically inedible when they're raw, so I'm not sure why I would ever bag them raw like this when I could cook them ahead of time, and so it would make them useful. And the salt and the sugar have no need for preserving, so I'm not sure why I would do those. But I'm taking notes, so it's science. I'm not just screwing around. That's the big difference. It's already been cooling for about 25 minutes, and it's down to about 35 degrees. And for these, it really doesn't matter. They're not going to melt. So I'll get them in there right now, and it's definitely going to go to the small batch cycle. So this is going to be done quite quickly. So it won't take much time, but we'll give it extra time to make sure. And we still will be weighing them to make sure that they get dry and stop losing weight. Okay, so tray 4 through 3, or tray 4, 3, 2, And finally 1. Okay. And we've got a good seal ring all the way around. And because of the lack of moisture, they probably also don't need any real freeze time. So maybe I'll just give them a couple hours. But I need to make sure that the barrel gets all the way cold still to capture any moisture that does come out of them so it doesn't go right through the vacuum pump. I'll let it get cold for a few hours and then we'll get it started. The dry things have been in there drying for about 6 hours and 20 minutes now. It's been in there longer because of the freeze time, but the actual freeze drying is about 6 hours and 20 minutes now. It did go to the small batch cycle and it's getting close to done with that. The top 3 trays are about 90 degrees and the bottom tray is about 70 degrees. The heater's not currently on, I can tell from the power usage, and the display says it's about 80 degrees on where the temperature probe is. We could take them out and weigh them because it's going to jump to final dry pretty soon, or I could just let it run. I guess I'm going to just let it run. It's going to be a ridiculous long time for something this dried, but that was kind of the plan. So we'll check it tomorrow morning. Obviously you can't have a negative pressure, so that's a calibration issue with the way it's set up, but not a big deal. But it does tell me that the pressure is very low in there. I need to get a gauge for that. The last few minutes, the heaters are off. So the trays are starting to cool, but it's only been a couple of minutes, so they haven't really cooled appreciably yet. The bottom tray is still 110 degrees. That's the highest I've seen it. The other ones are 120 or higher right now. So we'll get them out, check them, and put them back in for a couple of hours. So I'll do the switching of the trays like I have been, just for consistency. I don't expect any real water issues, and one of the nice things about this batch is whatever we do next, we don't have to defrost it in between because there's just basically no moisture in there. There's very little ice on the barrel. So we'll get them out and check them. So I'm going to bypass the rest of it by using the down arrow. So get the drain valve open and get the weights now. Probably should have let the air in slower to make sure that it doesn't blow anything around. Anyway, so tray 1. Okay, well it's definitely an 8 this time, 1758, and it's slightly lower. So 1757, 1758, right in between. And tray 2. 1661, 1660. Okay, that's quite a lot. It's like 80 or 90 grams. I'm going to put that one on the top shelf. And the sugar down. Is this one sugar or salt? I don't remember which one this is. And tray 3. 1745, and tray 4, 1654. Okay, that's like 100 grams. Those feel nice and warm. So those will go back up. And I'm going to put this one up here. And this one down here. Interesting. Okay, now we'll get the shield back in place. And get the drain valve closed. We'll get them restarted and give it at least 2 hours. And it's probably going to be 3 hours or so because I've got some other things I need to do. So the timing's not good to get them out in 2 hours, probably. I'll give it maybe 4 hours now, and then we can skip past the rest of it if I'm here earlier. Let's get it reset. Okay, gonna go more dry time. Drain valve's closed. I don't really have to worry about that. And then I'll bump it up to 4 hours on another final dry. Well, interestingly, at least to me, so far the sugar and the salt have only shown a loss of maybe 1 or 2 grams. The beans and the rice have shown 80 or 90 grams. But that's interesting. I thought that there was going to be more moisture in that sugar than there is. On the other hand, we do store it in a container that is airtight, but I'm still kind of surprised. Well, we'll come back and check it later. So I added an extra hour earlier, and it's almost done with half of that. So it's down to the last 40 minutes of that. All of the thermometers now are close to or above 120, including the bottom one. It'll be interesting to see if they've lost any weight now, but the sugar and salt looked like it had lost nothing or almost nothing. So we'll get them out and then take the thermometers out, and so we can get a good weight on them. And then I'll show you what we'll do next with them. Okay, so first we'll bypass the rest of the time. So I'm going to use the down arrow and bypass the rest of it. Now open the drain valve. And unless they change significantly, I'm going to go ahead and take them out because for this experiment it doesn't have to be 100%. Well, that's scorching. The thermometer on this one says more than 120, and it's definitely toasty. Okay, so 1757. So it's bouncing just like it did before. 1757 plus, so it's bouncing up and down. Tray 2 with the rice, and that has dropped 2 more grams, so 1658. I wonder if we should stir this and leave it in even longer just to be sure, but it's so little, and with that amount of time, for this experiment, I'm going to call that good enough and take that out. Tray 3, the sugar, and it's still, in fact, it's showing up 1. Let's recalibrate the scale at this spot. So it's about the same as before. We're going to take, and finally the beans. Wow, well that's interesting. 1647, so that's down 7 more, or maybe even as much as 8 more. So in that case, I am going to put that back in for a little while longer. And it probably doesn't matter for this experiment, because I'm not going to store them this way. So I'm going to just mix them up. And since I'm going to put this one back in, I'll put the rice back in for a little while longer also. Stir those around. I'm going to put that back in. I'm going to stir the rice around. I'm going to put it back in also then. The salt and the sugar, there doesn't seem to be any reason to put them back in though. So I'm going to take them out and finish that part of it. Okay, so I'm going to take these beans, I'm going to put that back in up on the 3rd rack shelf, and the rice, and put that one back up on this spot. So these tend to be consistently the 2 warmest spots. And I don't know that it really matters for the experiment I'm doing, but I'm going to put those back in there. So for the experiment I'm doing, it doesn't really matter if I get 100% of it out, but I do want to know if it's done. So I'm going to go ahead and put them back in for a couple more hours and see what happens, because the beans did lose a fairly significant amount of water in that amount of time. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. The salt and the sugar lost pretty much nothing during that time. So we'll take those over and get a final weight on those, and then I'll show you what we're going to do with those next. In the meantime, I'll let this sit here so that it's not making too much noise for the other until we get those taken care of, and then we'll restart this for 2 more hours. So on this part, we'll be right back. On the other part, we'll be right over there. Let's make sure that we're not having an air leak. So I'm going to get the seal ring all the way around. We're missing spots. Okay. And get the drain valve closed. Then we'll take care of the salt and sugar. Now we'll get the final weights of these two without the thermometers and see what happened. Well, 1749, 1 gram. I am stunned it had so little water in there, because that was just a cardboard box just sitting there. So I didn't expect that. A loss of 1 single gram. Now we'll get the other tray. So, and then the sugar is 1737, and so that lost no weight. I expected it to be, I don't know, 3 or 4%. 4% would be 40 with 1,000. So I'm really actually kind of surprised there was so little moisture in there. Oh, the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take these pans, put the salt in one, the sugar in the other, and then just cover them loosely with a paper towel to keep dust out of it, and let them set out in the atmosphere for maybe a month, and check them and see if they absorb moisture there. Our area where we're at right here is a relatively low humidity, and this room is relatively low humidity. It's not like Florida or something where you've got real humidity. So I'm not going to tear this out because we already know how much is here. So I just want a total there. Yeah, because otherwise we'd have to have the tear weight again. So I'm going to get all of this into there and we'll weigh it. Yeah, I'm just going to cover it with a paper towel like that. And I'll use that weight right there. So we have 1043. Okay, so now I can just take that off and weigh it and see how it changes over the next month. And we'll do the same with the salt. And I'm really surprised that they had such a little amount of moisture in them. I mean, we do keep our sugar in an airtight container, but I still figured it had more moisture than that in it before we started, before we put it in that container. So 1041, and it was 999 grams of salt. All right, we'll visit back with these in maybe a month, or weeks, or years if I forget. I'm back, and it's been about 2 hours. Both trays are over 120 degrees. The pressure is ridiculously low again. We'll take them out again and check them. The rice last time only dropped a very little. It's probably fine. And for this experiment, even if it lost as much as last time, the beans really are fine because I'm not going to store them dried like this. I'm going to take them and cook them, because beans and rice, I don't really have any desire to store them this way because I can't eat them this way. So I'd rather store them in some way that I could eat them. So I'll cook them first. Anyway, let's get them out and check them. Down to just over 15 minutes. I'll bypass the rest of it with the down arrow. Okay, I'm going to open the drain valve. Okay, and checking tray 2. And that is a very warm tray. Okay, 1657. So it's only down by 1 gram or maybe less than 1 gram. Then tray 4 with the beans, and that's a very toasty tray also. And 1645, 44. Okay, so it's down 2 to 2 and a part. Now it says 16. It's bouncing between 1645 and 1644. So it's 2 to 2 and a part grams. So I'm going to call that good enough for this purpose. For the batches I'm doing now, I'm going to do a few very low water batches. Some of them are kind of experimental batches. Some of them are things that we have done before and we want to do more of for storing purposes. The next one I think is going to be Cheerios, which should be dry, but somebody in the comments had asked about what about Cheerios. And the Honey Nut Cheerios were on sale at that exact same time. So we've got 4 boxes of them. We're going to put them through there and see what they lose, if anything. And then we'll store them in the Mylar bags. So in the meantime, I'm just going to leave this running and close it up. And close the drain valve. And then we'll get the time and the power usage and then just reset it. 30 hours basically, and I'm going to use that time for it. We'll get the power usage and then we'll come back to this. The power usage on that little experiment was 17.12 kilowatt hours, and I'm going to reset it. It's going to show a higher energy use still because the freeze dryer is still running. And usually I stop it, and so it's only showing 3.5 watts for the electronics. But this time I'm leaving it cooling. Because this batch only put a few ounces of water in the freeze dryer chamber for this experiment, I'm not going to be defrosting it. I'm going to do the next batch immediately afterwards. So I'm going to reset the machine so I'll cancel out of it with no defrost and then restart it immediately. I don't really need cooling per se because the next batch will also be a dry batch. But the chamber still needs to be cold. So we'll just restart it. So I'm going to stop it with no defrost. I'm going to restart it with customize, start, and continue. And we won't be using that amount of time. We'll change that after we put the food in. We'll get the weight of these last 2 trays. The final weight on the rice, 1648. So 1648. 1648. Subtract out the tray, 743. Turn it on before you press all the buttons. 1648. 1648 minus 743 is 905. So that lost 95 grams. So it's 9.5%. Okay. And then the beans, the dry beans, 1636. So 1636 minus 745 is 891. So it's 109 grams. So almost 11%. Cool. Now, with these, I am not bagging these in Mylar bags. I'm not bagging these in Mylar bags because I have no interest in storing beans and rice that I can't eat. So once they're cooked, if you put the freeze-dried beans or rice into bags, even though it's dry, it's still edible. It's ready to eat. You can't really eat this bean. It needs to be cooked so that it's ready to eat. So I'm going to just put these in Ziplocs and then I'm going to cook them to make sure that you could, if you want to, dry them more and then bag them and still cook them. I don't even know how these will work. Maybe they won't cook well anymore. Don't know. But we'll be finding out. So until I go to cook them, I'll put them in these zipper bags to wait for that to happen. So we'll get these beans bagged now. Somebody had asked on one of the videos how much water is in just regular rice. When we did the minute rice, they wanted to know, what about regular rice? Well, now we know. It's almost 10% by weight was water, and almost 11% by weight was for the beans was water. Interesting. So we're not storing any of these. The rice or the salt and sugar is set aside, covered with paper towel, and we'll check those over time. Until the next thing, that's it for these. So I'm going to cook the rice that they freeze-dried to get the extra water out, see if it still acts the same. And also, in a different pot, we'll get the beans that we dried. So we'll soak those overnight and then get them cooking and see if they come out the same also. Okay, the beans have soaked overnight. Now I'm going to rinse, so drain and refill. So I'm going to rinse these off. And then I'll start heating them to see if they will soften properly. The rice was perhaps not an absolute 100% total failure, perhaps only a 99% failure. And unfortunately, I used all the rice on one try without ever thinking about what I could have done. So I shouldn't have done the whole 1,000 grams at one try. And so I didn't get to try other ways. So what I ended up with is rice that broke into pieces, so it's small pieces. And I have kind of a wet, sticky rice with dry, completely dry rice pieces mixed in. So it's like the worst of both worlds. Anyway, oh, do we have a little bit of that other rice? This rice has a bit of soy sauce on it, but it was the exact same rice originally. You can see this broke into mush. Maybe you could make rice pudding or something. However, okay, two things about this rice and freeze drying it before it's been cooked. One is it might work to rehydrate it by letting it set with a small amount of moisture, maybe overnight or something, to get it rehydrated to what it was before. To get that 9 or 10% moisture level back in before you try to cook it. And two, I have zero interest on storing any rice that's not already cooked, or at least a 90% cooked, because it's not usable. I want it to be all of the things, or almost all the things I've put in the freeze dryer storage, I want to be edible, usable, the way it is out of the bag, even without adding water. It might not be the best and yummiest and greatest texture dry, but I want it to be edible. And the rice and the beans that are dry and not cooked yet are not edible. So I have no interest in it. So this was just an experiment, and I failed by not leaving myself the ability to do it the multiple ways. I should have done 100 grams trial. I could have had 10 different methods of testing because I think it probably could work, but I murdered it. So much for that rice. So I got it rinsed and refilled. Now I'm going to just bring it up to a very, very low simmer and let this cook for a while. See if they get properly tender. But again, much like the rice, I have no intention of putting any uncooked beans in my long-term storage. They're useless to me because my thought on an emergency use that I might need these would be either I'm on the move, so I don't have time to cook things, or our power is out and we don't have the ability to cook things. It just makes no sense to me. Maybe somebody else has a different idea or a different plan, and it might work for other groups of people. For our use, I don't see any reason to do it. So I'll get that simmering and we'll come back and check, see if it gets properly softened. These are the red kidney beans. Of course, they just saw those, so I don't have to mention that. Okay, so they did finally soften, but it took a ridiculously long time of simmering. So I soaked them overnight, and then I simmered them for about 10 hours to get them soft enough to be used. Okay. Yeehaw! So I could use these for some more refried beans or in anything else. But as I mentioned before, I have no intention of doing this and having dry beans in our storage that haven't already been cooked. It just doesn't make sense. You have to add way too much energy later when you may not have any energy available if it's an emergency. Okay, so I can drain these and blend them all up just like I did the other refried beans or anything else. So that's all there is with those. 3 weeks sitting out did not change it. Now let's try the salt, which during the drying process only lost 1 single gram. And so this was 1041 and it's still 1041. So again, no change. And again, I'm kind of bummed. I was expecting something dramatic and interesting, and actually this is interesting but boring. Okay, well, that's the conclusion of 3 weeks of that test. I'll probably leave them sitting in these containers for a while longer. I might try them in a different location to see if the humidity level is different. But I really thought they would go up. When we did the strawberries, they went up 3%, 6%. I think it was 6% in weight on those in just 12 hours. So some of the other things really pull in moisture more than this. I don't think having a paper towel on there would make any difference. I don't think I had the strawberries covered with anything, but I can't imagine how that's a barrier to moisture. So that's all for that, unless we check it again later. The rice and the sugar lost pretty much nothing. The salt and the sugar lost pretty much nothing during that time.